Wow, this is about as brutal a time as I can remember. On pretty much every front, domestically, internationally, the state of the relationship of the Jewish people to the world, the embattled and sometimes embattling positions of the state of Israel, assaulted unbelievably now several years ago by Hamas and dealing with an impossible war, the levels of devastation and the pictures of suffering that come from the civilians in Gaza who have been largely held hostage through this entire process themselves. Um, it's heartbreaking. And all of us, I think, have a sense of accumulated despair and agony and anxiety that just keeps butting into everything else we do. And um, and in the midst of all of that, I did have a thought that I want to launch our year with. A couple years ago, when COVID hit and we were all first required to isolate ourselves, my wonderful wife decided that the best response to COVID was to do something life affirming. And anyone who knows Ilana knows that that is never halfway. So she bought a forest of milkweed, and she created these bungalows for monarch butterflies. And for a couple years running, we had this amazing nursery of literally hundreds of caterpillars, each of whom started as eggs that she would go to the plants and meticulously find and put in the little nursery, and then put them in the caterpillar bungalows. And then eventually, we would take the caterpillars, and as she released them, she would say, "Fly away and be free. Fly away and be free." Hundreds of monarch butterflies, none of whom write or visit. And it made me think of a very different way of collecting butterflies. When I went to school at a place that at the time was fairly philo-Semitic, they had an august natural history museum where someone had taken hundreds, if not thousands, of butterflies and poked a needle through them to stick them on a plate. And you can go and you can look at these long dead butterflies from all over the world. One collection is permanent and lifeless. And one collection, you have to be willing to say, "Fly away and be free." And it is the one that is full of life. Love it and let it go. And I'm thinking about that in terms of what we're about to do together here. You can imagine the accumulated legacy of Torah as being part of a desiccated, dried museum in which it is stuck with a pin on a piece of cloth. Look at how those quaint Israelites lived in the late Iron Age. Look at how those medieval Jews lived in their shtetls and their homes. Look at how they survived this and that trauma inflicted on them by outsiders. There is no life in such learning. You're just memorializing the dead. And if you do that, what you miss is the genius of the Jewish lust for life and our continued commitment to a world that often does not reciprocate our romance. 2 summers ago, we went on a vacation to see the Grand Canyon. If you've not seen it, you should definitely see it. It's one of those things in the world that you cannot accurately photograph. The pictures don't look like what your eye sees. It's amazing. But the most amazing thing that we saw was we went to an 11th century Native American village. No longer occupied, it's now part of the national park system, but it was a complete 2-story edifice in the middle of the desert, complete with a Gaga court, right, which it turns out is a Native American game before it was a Jewish summer camp game. And because I'm a rabbi, I'm going to assume it's because I'm a rabbi, I walk through it seeing peculiar things that no one else notices. So I asked the tour guide, do we have any written records of these people's history? Do we know their names? Do we know their holidays? Do we know who their most famous poet was, or their greatest warrior, or an incredible romance, and we don't. They didn't put things down in writing. This is not a criticism. What they did, managing to survive literally in the middle of the hot blast of Arizona, is astonishing. But they come from the same time period as Rashi. And I do know who our great poets were. And I know what my ancestors were up to by name. And I can read their letters to each other. I can read their commentaries to the commentaries to our sacred texts, because they poured out their love into literature, into an unbroken heritage of studious spirituality, a fountain of creativity that never stops so long as we are willing to engage, if we make ourselves a part of it. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they believed that what they were reading were not simply the records of our ancestors, but the eruption into materiality of the one who gave us life, the one who gives us life. There is divinity in Torah to those who see it not as simply an ancient document, which it also is, but see it as an Eitz Chaim, a living tree. But there are two pieces of responsibility I want to highlight to you, because they are both under assault. The first is, you cannot be creative with a heritage you have not mastered. There is no way to make Torah relevant, to highlight the parts of it that allow for a greater flourishing of life, that can contribute to the wisdom of the world, if you yourself have not taken the moments to master what has come before. And I don't need to tell you that sometimes that isn't fun. There's a whole lot of grammar out there waiting for you. And before you can do the pirouettes with a Kal V'chomer, you have to know what one is. And you have to know how it works and how to break one. So there's going to be on us a great responsibility if this living legacy is to remain alive, so that it has a role in the world. That's on us. You are the shock troops of a living Torah, and your girding up is necessary for that tradition to have an impact in the world, which it desperately needs. But the second challenge is there's a residual temptation to view the Torah like those taxidermists like to view butterflies. As if you just quote a lot of dead guys, then that somehow constitutes a legacy. It does not. Museums are where art goes to die. And the Torah is not meant to be in a museum. It is needed on the streets and in the hospitals and in the homes and in the midst of our most intimate relationships. That is where Torah is meant. And that means we have to make ourselves tradents of this tradition. There's a wonderful quotation of my teacher's teacher. My teacher, whose portrait is in my room, Rabbi Simon Greenberg, who was the founding rabbi of this place, studied with Solomon Schechter. And Solomon Schechter writes, the Amoraim themselves contradicted several Mishnayot and claimed that the law was otherwise than the Mishnah had claimed. For, and here's the part I want you to remember, wisdom is greater than the wise. Wisdom is greater than the wise, since there is no sage free from error, and perfect wisdom belongs to God alone. Solomon Schechter is inviting us to show remarkable chutzpah, a holy chutzpah, to be able to say, I know this is what some ancient rabbi argued, but they're missing the point. They've not understood the text properly. There's a piece of information that you need to bring into this conversation that changes the outcome. To be unwilling to critique our ancestors, all credit to them, would be both to betray what they did with their ancestors. The Tosfot will tell you when Rashi's wrong. The Gemara rereads the Mishnah all the time. The Mishnah will make its interpretations regardless of what the Torah says when it needs to. We also need to stand in their place. We are today's generation of decisors, and we need to have the courage to say, here is where God's word stands, even if that's not how it was understood before us. Which is why the Talmud says, in the quotation here of Rabbi Shimon ben Semach Duran, the Tashbetz, for a judge has only what their eyes can see, and we should not show deference in matters of Torah. When a matter hinges on logic, later authorities may have revelations that the earlier never imagined. I can think of three that I want to highlight here. When I went to rabbinical school, many of you would not have been allowed in the room. You are in the room today because brave people, aflame with God's truth as being more important than the version they had been handed, said this isn't what the tradition has to or ought to mean. This school and our world is better because you are here. And we will continue to read the Torah in a way that is curious and courageous and open and embracing, and therefore somewhat destabilizing. Because God is all of those things. And we also are a generation committed to an Israel that is Jewish and democratic. And that many in our tradition would have told us was a complete violation of Jewish tradition. We're supposed to passively wait for the Messiah to show us our destiny. And at some point, brave Jews said, we're not waiting anymore. And if they were willing to critique the authorities of their time, then it remains a Jewish obligation to critique the authorities of our time, including our beloved Israel, when we think that it can be strengthened with such critique. The wisdom is greater than the wise. We are each of us flawed. You are too. You'll make mistakes just like we did. But I pray that the learning we do together this year will stop you from making the mistake of ignorance or silence, and that you will recognize that our tradition is a constant invitation to step in and step up, and to do so with a commitment to the one who bubbles out into Torah, into life, vivifying each of us, energizing all of us with the confidence that God isn't done with us. Shalom.